I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Dakota Fanning, who stars as Susan Ford in the new Showtime limited series, The First Lady. And Dakota, obviously, I think the first thing that stands out and will stand out for a lot of people on this show is the fact that it's a reunion of sorts between you and Michelle Pfeiffer, but in a completely different dynamic. Not just with time, but in the relationship that you're portraying. Was that something that just immediately appealed to you about this?
It did. I think it was, one of the main reasons I wanted to be a part of it. I Am Sam was my first movie. I was 6 and I turned 7 on the set. And on The First Lady, I was 26 and I turned 27 on my first day. So it was seemed so coincidental and perfect. And Michelle, I hadn't seen her like a ton of times throughout the years, but she's such a presence in my life just because that movie and that experience is so pivotal to kind of who I am in my career. And I have such fond memories, and so getting to know her as the person that I am now. And also, I think anytime you connect with somebody who's known you since you were so small, there's like kind of a cozy sort of familial vibe almost, and we've become quite close. And I just love her so much, and it was a thrill to get to work with her, and of course be a part of the show, and telling the Ford family story and seeing her transform into Betty Ford. It was pretty amazing.
Well, and I think that familial aspect is something that comes through so clearly. And yet, for a lot of people, people are familiar with Betty Ford, but not familiar with Susan. So where did you start your research process?
I found what footage I could of Susan. A lot of it was more of Susan as an adult woman, kind of, not that long ago in recent years. But there was, a lot of photographs and some video footage of the family in the White House. But I watched this one particular interview with her not that long ago, and she was talking about her parents and the love that existed within the family, and I think that kind of helped me the most, because I think something about, they went through so much, the Ford family. They never thought that the trajectory of President Ford was never to be president, so it was kind of thrown at them last minute. um, and how they got through the trials and tribulations of their life, I think, was how much they deeply cared about one another. And so I really gleaned that from that one particular interview with Susan. And I think speaking with Michelle, who had done so much research on Betty and was very focused on being respectful to Betty's legacy and her memory, and the family and all of that. So she was kind of the police on set of, making sure that things weren't being dramatized too much with Betty. She really wanted to, she kind of knew everything. So it was great to have to have her around. But I think, and Susan is their only daughter, and Betty and Susan were extremely, extremely close. And, they were best friends. They were mother and daughter, had a really close bond, for better or for worse at times. But, their relationship was kind of also fundamental for, Betty seeking treatment for her own addictions, and Susan was kind of instrumental in that. And then, of course, what Betty is perhaps best known for is her treatment center that has helped so many people, but also learning about all of the other things that she did for breast cancer awareness, being open about having breast cancer, and the Equal Rights Amendment. Just so there were so many things that she had done that I didn't even know, and I loved learning about the family, and loved learning about her.
There's an almost an innocent quality, particularly in those scenes with Susan, because this is someone growing up outside of the age of social media, and outside of the glare of the 24-hour news cycle. Is that kind of, it's almost in many ways like almost kind of like a historical lesson And I have to imagine that some of those, particularly I'm thinking about the scenes where they're discussing her prom. Um,
Yeah.
and I thought, wow, it's not that long ago, but it feels like such a long time ago when that happened. Were those kinds of details, uh, uh, were those challenging kind of things to play, or were those like almost kind of refreshing?
Yeah, I think they were refreshing. I love, one of the things that the Fords are known for is having held Susan's senior prom at the White House. And it's like, that probably wouldn't happen today, but yeah, that I loved getting to incorporate that little tidbit into the show. And getting to play a character for a great span of time was also cool, starting out in high school and then when she was in her kind of 20s, that was cool to see that. And yeah, I mean, it is refreshing to see a time without phones. Like she's like an angsty teen in some of the scenes, but it's not like with a cell phone in her hand. There's but yeah,
Technology
no, it was.
technology comes and goes, but angst is forever.
But angst is forever. Yeah, the angsty teen lives on no matter what era.
I I wonder how did you, and not just you and Michelle, but you and Aaron Eckhart, who plays President Ford, how did you guys work together to try and kind of establish that family dynamic? Because it's so believable.
Thank
You
you.
really feel it. You really feel the family
Yeah.
connection in those scenes.
Well, I think for me and Michelle, it was kind of instant. Like I said, having that, sort of feeling like you have this close bond for so many years. So it was very instant with her. And then with Aaron, I got along with him right away. Like, loved him so much. We laughed so hard together. We found kind of the same sense of humor. And it was so fun getting to work with him. So I think that just was natural. It was one of those situations like that you pray for, that you'll have natural chemistry with the people that are playing your parents or your family. It just kind of happened. This was the first project that I think most of us had worked on since the pandemic had started. It was for me, for sure. So it was kind of being tested every single day. People were slowly starting to get their vaccines sort of during production, but there was a big chunk of it where that didn't happen. So you kind of were, I was just sort of sitting in my apartment, like by myself for most of the time and looking forward to going to work because I would get to talk to someone that, wasn't a friend at home or my mom or my sister. But then towards the end, when we things were a little bit safer to be slightly social. Like I would go to Michelle's and spend the weekend with Michelle and her husband David. They would invite me to stay, and we had like fun dinners with Suzanne, the director, at the house that Michelle was staying at. And so we got these little glimpses of being able to be social towards the end, which was really really fun. But I think that chemistry was just kind of, very instantaneous and very natural. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have to kind of work harder at that or act a little bit more. But that was something I don't think any of us had to really act out. We just felt we got along right away.
Yeah, you mentioned Susanna Bier, who's such a spectacular director and works on these kind of massive projects. And what is she like as a director?
I love Suzanne so much. I didn't know her before this. We just had one Zoom before I went to Atlanta to start shooting. And I just can't say enough great things about her. She is, if I had to describe her as a director, it would be direct. She doesn't mince words, It's like she just gets right to the point of what she wants to see more of or less of, or that someone's not doing or whatever it is. She just gets right in there, which I appreciate. Might as well not waste any time. But I just, again, we just clicked and really bonded as well. And she had kind of a lot of things to juggle. This was filmed in 3 different blocks. So the Betty block was first. So we were sort of starting off this, journey that took Susanna all the way until like the fall, pretty much. We started in February, and she had such a task of weaving the stories together and kind of almost making three little movies, and it was an honor to work with her, and she's become, a lifelong friend, and yeah, I just love her. I just love her.
A series like this, I feel like is so kind of, it's so past time to have a show like this that shows us, these details of our elected officials and their families.
Yeah.
What do you think the main kind of takeaway that viewers should take away from this series?
Well, I think sometimes, the president of the United States or the first family or the first lady, they become these kind of figures and these icons that people look up to or that they like or don't like, or and it becomes the politics and all of that. And I think sometimes you lose sight of that the president is also a husband and a father, and the first lady is a wife and a mother, and they're like partners and whatever. And so you can lose sight of the just sort of human elements of these people. And so I think that this show definitely reminds you that these people have a life behind the closed doors of the White House, and they had a life before, and they had a life, a full life after, and so I think it's a good reminder that everyone's just a person at the end of the day, no matter their position in society. Obviously, the president and first lady has great power, but there's also a human being there too. And I think in terms of just highlighting the women, I think like you said, I'm surprised that it hasn't, that a show like this hasn't happened before. It feels like it should have happened many, many times. But, I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and thrilled to show these women in their full glories, and the things that they've done while in the White House, and the things they've accomplished before and after. And there's a lot to these women besides being the wives of the presidents, and so it's cool to give that life.
I think that's so. I think one of the things that I responded to was the through line of that no matter what century or what decade we're in, this whole concept of men trying to micromanage women, because in all of the stories,
in all of them, yeah,
there's this, and you get some really kind of comic looks. You give some side eye in some of these scenes. That is it important to you to be able to bring those types of moments into a character?
Yeah, it's always exciting when that's a part of the character, to get to, I found myself in some of the scenes being an observer, like maybe not having being involved in a conversation that might have been happening, but still getting to be present through, like, I don't know, are you talking about with Donald Rumsfeld on the plane? Yeah. Yeah, that moment is great when he calls me Susie, and
If
I
looks
say
could
it's
kill.
Susan. It's Susan. And yeah, so those moments are always fun to show. And I think especially with Betty and Susan, they had like a lot of inside jokes between them about certain players in the White House, and so you kind of see a little bit of their humor also.
We were talking before. I mean, your career has been, for a lot of your life, it has been on screen, and I'm wondering, as you've grown in the industry, how have you kind of maintained kind of this attraction to specific projects that catch your fancy? What do you attribute the variety of your projects to?
Yeah, I've never been able to decide to be a part of something other than just like some sort of internal reaction that I want to be a part of it, like it could be, with this, it was a lot of different things, but it could be something as small as just, oh my God, I want to work with Michelle. I want to see Michelle, like, oh, that sounds like so much fun, and then just happen to be like a really interesting, cool project and loving Susanna's work and wanting to work with her and those things. But, the little kind of first crackle is like, oh my God, it'd be so fun to work with Michelle again, and then so it's always, and as for the variety, I think that just is probably is a little glimpse into who I am, which is sort of a lot of different things. And I have a lot of weird things about my personality, a lot of normal things, a lot of like good girl, bad girl. I'm kind of a bunch of different qualities in one person. So maybe that can take credit for some of the variety. But I think ultimately it's just kind of something instinctual. I've sort of honed it down to one little thing that I realize that I do when I'm reading a script that I want to do. I'll find myself reading the lines out loud to see like what it sounds like, or wanting to kind of, I'm like, oh my God, it's such a great line, or like wanting, and I'll say it out loud. And that's been a through line into like projects that I've either done or wanted to do. If the lines make me want to say them, that's just a weird thing I've noticed, because I get asked this question, a lot, because, and it's hard to kind of distill it down into what it is, because it honestly is just some sort of subconscious, unconscious feeling. But that's a little thing that I've noticed. I'm like, oh, these lines make me want to say them. I don't know.
Do you think that can you think of another first family that you think would benefit from this sort of investigation? Because we've heard about this anthology going forward. I'm just curious if as a viewer, has there been any family that you think would benefit from this?
God, it's such an interesting question. It's so funny. And we've talked a lot about if this were to go on, like what would some other people be? I read Jenna and Barbara Bush's book that they wrote about being sisters. It was more about them, but I think anytime that children are also growing up in the White House, and like the first lady is a mother that's having to mother kids, like Susan was the only child growing up in the Ford family White House, but I think it's so interesting getting to see, Viola Davis as Michelle Obama having very young children. So I think anytime that there's kind of a first family that had kids like actively living and having to like go to school in the White House, you know what I mean? Like it's so kind of out there. But honestly, there are so many, and I hope we do get to see, more brought to life. But yeah, I'm thrilled that people will know more about Betty from this. I think the show does a really good job of showing a lot of things that these women have done, and yeah.
It's also such a powerful story about our mothers and daughters, which is always
Totally.
always universal.
Yeah.
Dakota Fanning, thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for more interviews with contenders throughout the season. Dakota Fanning from The First Lady, thank you so much.
Thank you.